Namaskaram, Tiruchittambalam. Today we look at the Varna system, how it started in ancient Bharat, how it changed over time, and how it looks like in modern India today. To understand the soul of Bharat, we must decode the relationship between its spiritual source and its legal structure. In modern terms, the Veda, that is Shruti, is the source code which is the binary foundation that powers the civilization. As society grew, this transitioned into Smriti, the remembered tradition that translates abstract truths into practical applications. This evolution followed a precise technical path. First, the Dharma Sutras acted as the operating system, condensed cryptic manuals for specific schools. These eventually expanded into Dharma Shastras, the SOPs of the ancient world. These were poetic, detailed constitutions that turned sutra logic into public administrative codes for the state. We examine this wisdom through three evidentiary lenses. The academic view uses a linguistic framework starting at 1500 BCE. The indigenous view uses archaeoastronomy to match celestial descriptions in text to 4000 BCE. Finally, the deep antiquity view uses geological data of the Saraswati River to anchor the start at 7500 BCE. By sharing these linguistic, astronomical, and geological foundations, we do not dismiss the Puranas. We simply hold the Puranic timelines apart to engage with the common academic framework used in global social forums today. The table you see here is designed to compare the timelines of Dharma Sutras and Dharma Shastras across three major perspectives: academic, indigenous, and deep antiquity. Its construct is simple. Each text is placed within three parallel chronological frameworks. The academic view begins with the Vedic age around 1500 BCE and is the focus of our presentation. The indigenous view uses archaeoastronomy to trace earlier dates, while the deep antiquity view anchors timelines even further back using geological and planetary data. The overlapping dates between Sutra and Shastra periods are not mistakes, but a reflection of a living, breathing legal evolution across a vast geography. In ancient Bharat, new systems did not replace the old overnight. Rather, they moved like a wave across the diverse provinces. Choosing the academic view for our video does not mean the other two views are wrong. The indigenous and deep antiquity views have very strong points and offer a deep look at our history. However, we are using the academic timelines allows us to have a conversation about the social and legal side of these texts, the side that critics usually ignores and get wrong. Purusha Suktham speaks about Varna from a functional perspective. However, many people cut and paste only the 12th verse and argue that it implies a birth based system. This is a misconception that arises when the verse is not read fully. One should read the full hymn with its logic, intent, and context. Verse 12 should not be read in isolation but must be understood in conjunction with verse 1 and verse 14. In verse 1, it says that all heads, eyes, and feet of all beings belong to the cosmic Purusha, meaning that everyone's heads, eyes, and feet come from their respective source of Purusha. This establishes equality. In verse 14, it says that the earth emerges from his feet. Since the earth is the life force and life source of all species, this implies that all beings originate from the same fundamental source. Moreover, Purusha Suktam speaks about cosmology and biophysics and not humanities. So, what is the collective meaning? From the biophysics perspective, the four Varnas reflect functional specialization within a single living system. Think of a seed growing into a plant. The knowledge to sprout and grow is the Brahmana function, like the plant's guiding signals. Protection against harm is the Kshatriya function, like the plant's defensive mechanisms. Gathering nutrients and energy is the Vaisya function, like roots and leaves working to sustain life. And finally, serving others through its fruits is the Sudra function, like the plant supporting the ecosystem. The concept that Varna is based on qualities and actions rather than birth is clearly stated in the Bhagavad Gita. In chapter 4, verse 13, Krishna declares it. The four Varnas were created according to the divisions of guna, qualities, and karma, actions. This is an important clarification that builds upon the symbolic descriptions found earlier in the Purusha Sukta, where the social order is explained through cosmic symbolism. The Bhagavad Gita makes the principle explicit. It is qualities and conduct that determines one's role. This is further reinforced in chapter 18, verse 41, which states that the duties of Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaisyas, and Sudras arise from their inherent qualities. Among the 18 Smritis, scholars often observe differences in the degree of rigidity in their prescriptions. Some texts appear relatively strict, others moderate, and some comparatively lenient in their interpretations of social and legal duties. Here, the term rigid does not imply cruelty or oppression. Rather, it refers to a more detailed or stricter textual formulation of rules and qualifications. The cruel and oppressive verses are interpolations of later stage by ill-minded people. While all the Smritis discuss the framework of the four Varnas, many of them also recognize the possibility of movement between Varnas based on guna, meaning qualities, and karma, meaning conduct or actions. The differences among the texts lie mainly in how strongly the conditions for such movement are articulated. Some prescribe stricter qualifications, others present moderated formulations, and a few express the idea with greater flexibility. At the same time, it is important to note that the currently available market editions of these texts cannot be assumed to represent a single uniform practice across India, as the Smritis have undergone regional transmission, variations, and possible interpolations over time. The idea that Varna is connected to conduct rather than birth is also reflected in Manusmriti. In chapter 10, verse 65, it states that a Sudra may attain the status of a Brahmana and a Brahmana may fall to the position of a Sudra depending on their conduct. This indicates that social status can change according to one's actions. Similarly, verse 10.67 explains that through learning, discipline, and righteous behavior, individuals may rise in status, while neglect of duty and dharma can lead to decline. Together, these verses suggest that ethical conduct and character play a crucial role in determining one's position, reinforcing the broader Dharmasastric idea that qualities and actions influence social roles. The concept of second birth or Tvija is explained in the Abhastamba Dharma Sutra and the Srimad Bhagavatam. Abhastamba states that every person is first born from the mother as a human being, but through the Upanayana or sacred thread initiation, one attains a second birth. The idea is further elaborated in the Bhagavatam, which says that after this initiation, the student lives in the Guru's ashrama, practices discipline, and studies the Vedas. The emphasis here is that spiritual status is not automatic by birth, but is achieved through education, discipline, and spiritual training. Thus, the tradition presents Tvija as a process of learning and transformation rather than a mere biological identity. The importance of knowledge and conduct over mere birth is clearly emphasized in the Baudhayana Dharma Sutra and the Vasishtha Dharma Sutra. Baudhayana states that a Brahmana without Vedic knowledge is like a wooden elephant or a leather deer, an object that resembles the real but lacks its true essence. In other words, the title alone has no meaning without knowledge. Similarly, the Vasishtha Dharma Sutra explains that everyone is born a Sudra, but through samskaras, one becomes twice born, through study of the Veda, one becomes learned, and through realization of Brahman, one becomes a true Brahmana. These teachings highlight that spiritual status is defined by learning, discipline, and realization, not merely by birth. Various Greek observers who visited ancient Bharat between 400 BCE and 100 CE described society primarily in terms of functions and occupations rather than rigid birth based divisions. The Greek ambassador Megasthenes, in his work Indica, described Indian society as organized into several functional groups such as farmers, soldiers, artisans, and philosophers, classes defined by what people did in society. Another Greek envoy, Dimachus, supported similar observations, noting that social organization followed customs and occupations. The writer Dionysius focused especially on philosophers and ascetics, highlighting the intellectual and spiritual traditions of the land rather than any rigid caste hierarchy. Later, the geographer Strabo in Geographia reiterated these earlier reports describing Indian society as structured around professional roles and social functions. Taken together, these external accounts suggest that ancient Indian social organization was widely perceived by foreign observers as functional and occupational in character rather than strictly hereditary. The idea that conduct determines social and spiritual status is clearly expressed in classical Dharma texts. The Apastamba Dharma Sutra explains that through the practice of Dharma, a person of a lower Varna may attain a higher one, while through Adharma, even a higher Varna may decline. In this view, birth is only the starting point, but one's actions and character determines the final position. Similarly, the Yajnavalkya Smriti provides a legal and social framework for Jhatyutkarsa, meaning movement across the Varna, or the gradual refinement of lineage, where a family could rise in social status over generations through disciplined conduct, adherence to higher duties, and purificatory rites. Together, these texts emphasize that Varna was understood as dynamic and shaped by dharma, discipline, and ethical living rather than fixed solely by birth. Similar notes and explanations are found in Narada Smriti, Parasara Smriti, and Vyasa Smriti, etc. Together, these texts consistently highlight ethical living and performance of duty as the real makers of social and spiritual standing. Historical records also show that social mobility occurred in many periods of Indian history. Several Rajputs, including the Gurjara Pratikaras, are believed to have transitioned from pastoral or tribal backgrounds into recognized Kshatriya warrior lineage between the 7th and 12th centuries. The Kayasthas, originally known for roles as scribes and administrators, gradually rose to a high status social position during the medieval period. Similarly, the Pala dynasty, founded by Gopala in the 8th century, rose from the non Kshatriya origins to imperial Kshatriya status. In South India, powerful merchant guilds such as the Ayyaval 500 and Nana Desi sometimes assumed military and political roles, reflecting a shift from commercial functions to Kshatriya like responsibilities. These examples illustrate how status could evolve historically through occupation, power, and social recognition. History also records several other examples. In South India, artisan groups such as the Kammalar, renowned for architecture, metallurgy, and craftsmanship, gained high social prestige during the Chola dynasty and later the Vijayanagara Empire. Similarly, the Hoysala dynasty, which likely emerged from hill or pastoral communities in the western Ghats, rose to become imperial Kshatriya rulers between the 11th and 14th centuries. In the Dharmic tradition of Bharat, whenever the Smritis or Dharmasastras became complicated or were misapplied by ill minded interpreters, later sages often responded by simplifying and reformulating Dharma for their times. A good example is the Parasara Smriti, traditionally dated around the 6th century CE and often associated with guidance for the Kali Yuga. Compared with many earlier texts, it presents simpler and more flexible formulations of Dharma, emphasizing conduct and practical ethics. In the 10th century, however, the composition of the new Smritis declined and scholars increasingly produced Nibandhas, legal digests, and commentaries that preserved and interpreted earlier Dharma texts. During this period, historical evidence suggests that movement across Varnas became less common while communities became more inward looking. This continued after 12th century due to political instability and cultural disruptions. Over time, traditional social structures were further reshaped as later foreign and eventually colonial administrative systems introduced new legal and social frameworks, transforming how these earlier dharmic ideas functioned in society. When the Delhi Sultanate and later the Mughal Empire established power, India experienced a major political shift. Administration was organized through imperial service and revenue structures rather than through the Smriti framework. For example, the imperial system described in the Ain-e-Akbari, compiled by Abul Fazl under Akbar, ranked officials mainly by military service and taxation rather than by Varna status. This period also saw episodes of warfare and institutional disruption. The destruction of major learning centers such as Nalanda Mahavihara and Vikramashila University during campaigns of Bhaktimar Gilji led to the loss of manuscripts and displacement of scholars. Warfare, temple raids, and heavy taxation in some regions created social and cultural stress. At the same time, Vedic and Smriti traditions did not disappear across the subcontinent. Temples, Sanskrit learning, and Smriti interpretation continued in many regions, and scholars compiled new Dharma digests to preserve and interpret traditions under changing conditions. As a result, many communities increasingly relied on their own institutions, temples, scholars, and customary councils to regulate social and religious life. This inward consolidation helped preserve cultural identity, but it also strengthened community boundaries over time. During the Mughal period, the agrarian administration gradually operated through a three-tier structure consisting of Jagirdars or imperial revenue holders at the top, Zamindars as local intermediaries, and the Rayats or cultivators at the base. While earlier social traditions in many regions had allowed functional flexibility within occupations, the pressures of revenue extraction and political control brought more rigid interpretations of the existing Varna and social hierarchies to the forefront of local life. Indigenous legal traditions, such as those discussed in Mitaksara Smriti Digest, had expanded women's property rights, yet the Mughal revenue structure largely ignored female economic agency, placing land ownership and tax responsibilities firmly within patriarchal control. The system also created a steep vertical hierarchy designed primarily for siyasat or political administration, where wealth and authority flowed upward while the burden of agricultural production remained with the cultivators. In many regions, local elites and intermediaries were able to exploit this structure, strengthening rigid social divisions and consolidating wealth and authority within their own families. As a result, manual laborers and farmers, the main producers, were classified as ryots or muzarians, linking them to the land through taxes, debts, and the control of zamindars. Over time, this combination of political control, revenue pressure, and local exploitation contributed to reduced social mobility. By the late medieval period, when social mobility had already weakened in many regions, communities increasingly organized themselves in more closed and hereditary structures. When the British established administrative control in India, they attempted to govern a highly diverse society through fixed legal and bureaucratic categories. In doing so, they relied heavily on selective textual interpretations and census classifications, gradually transforming fluid social identities into rigid caste categories. The introduction of Anglo Hindu law, centralized courts, and systematic census enumeration encouraged communities to be recorded as hereditary social groups rather than as roles of qualities expressed through conduct. At the same time, colonial policies such as administrative categorization, separate political representation, and legal codification further hardened these identities. As a result, the earlier philosophical emphasis found in Vedic and Dharmashastra traditions, where social roles were ideally linked to ethical conduct, learning, and duty, was increasingly overshadowed by a birth based caste structure recognized by the colonial state. Finally, the modern Bharat has transitioned from the ancient Varna system to a community centric model. Today, each community functions as a self contained ecosystem, unified by its own Kuladaivam, Kulaguru, and unique customs and traditions, etc. Consequently, the stages of Sudra, that is service, Vaisya, that is yearning, Kshatriya, that is protection, and Brahmin, that is spirituality, now exist within every community, allowing individuals to progress through these roles over the course of their lives. The set of beliefs and customs at community level is called Sampradaya. This community centric Sampradaya is protected under the Indian Constitution as religious denominations. Articles 25 to 28 maintain their own unique belief, faith, customs, and traditions. Within each of these denominations, the four functional stages Varna are practiced internally, knowingly, or unknowingly. Because Sampradaya is rooted in shared faith and sacred customs rather than just social status, it remains a more resilient identity than the traditional caste system. Even if administrative caste labels were abolished, the Sampradaya identity would likely persist as a primary source of cultural and spiritual heritage. Indian society has historically evolved through numerous Sampradayas, each with its own beliefs, practices, and philosophical foundations. Because of this inherent diversity, it is neither historically accurate nor socially practical to compress all traditions into a single uniform framework. In that sense, the plurality of Indian traditions reminds us that not all birds can perch on the same branch of a tree. That's all for today's video. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your time and attention.